last week we came to you with the first part of the Lover's Lane saga from Trenton, Tennessee. And in that first episode, we talked about the murder or the dead couple that wound up there in 1954.
Yeah, it was weird because we talked about that spot. And, actually, even last week, Sally gotten the messages and comments for YouTube. And she said she heard gunshots out there, too.
Yeah. Sally Jackson,
Yeah.
Sally Ragsdale.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and you did too. I mean, you talked about how when you were out at your mom and dad's, it's really, really close to where all this went down.
Right.
That you had heard something like that in the past.
I'm not the only one.
No, you're not. And there were others that lived in that area too, that grew up kind of around Jackson Circle and all that was on the east side of it. But interestingly enough, we're back for part 2, which takes us 2 years deeper into history in 1952 at the exact same spot. As Doc Garrison put it, within inches.
That's right.
He said, this was the sheriff at the time during both of these cases. He said in 1954, when the second couple was found, you couldn't have gotten closer if you used a tape measure.
That's right. And that was Willie Wallace Shelton and R.J. Buckingham. And that's what we covered last week.
In 1954.
Yep, April of 1954.
So this week we said be looking out for the episode about the juice. So this one is the one that draws the most attention and wonder about the Lover's Lane tales of Trenton, Tennessee. This from 1952.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to paint this picture a little bit different than what I feel like it's been told in the past. So, I mean, not different. I mean, it's the same story, but I wanted to take it on with a little bit more perspective from Kathleen, because I don't know that there was much said about her, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, there was just a few things said about her, and it was kind of passe, but all right. So we're going to tell the story this week of the 1952 Lover's Lane murders. Not necessarily murder-suicide.
No, that was last week.
But suspected murders.
This is murders.
And who did it involve?
This involved R.H. Phelan, which was Robert Hayes Phelan, and Kathleen Wilson McCage. So.
Okay. And as you tell the story, it's pretty obvious that he was involved with Phelan Motor Company, or at the time it went under a different name, and it wasn't exclusively Ford.
That's right. It was McCaleb and Phelan Motor Company.
Right.
And it wasn't Ford. I mean, I think the car they were in was a
Dodge.
Was it a Dodge?
A Dodge.
Okay, so there you go.
All right. Well, again, 1952, Lover's Lane, Trenton, Tennessee.
Yes.
Here's the story.
All right. So we're going back to January of 1952. And 24-year-old Kathleen Wilson McCage had just gotten a divorce from her abusive husband. At least that's what she filed for. She filed for cruel and inhumane treatment. So that sounds pretty bad. And she was just getting out of that. He was pretty abusive financially and physically and verbally, I would think, if that's cruel and inhumane treatment. And he also had enough power to take full custody of her son, their 5-year-old son together, little Johnny McCage. But Kathleen was not really willing to just tuck her tail and run completely. She was determined to stay in her son's life, even if that meant having to go back and forth from Trenton to Milan to see him.
So her ex-husband and son were living in Milan.
That's right.
Were they living in Milan when they divorced?
Yes, he worked over at the Milan Arsenal. He was security over there.
Okay, so I guess really what I'm getting at is she had moved to Trenton after the divorce.
That's right.
Okay.
So she moves to Trenton, and she was very beautiful. I mean, the pictures I've seen of her, she was a beautiful girl, and I think she used her beauty to get what she needed from men. And she started dating men that had some kind of authority, some kind of power or pull in that town. And I think she did that because she felt safe with them and because she did not have a car. So, she had to have these men take her over to see her son
Yeah.
when she wanted to go see him. Kathleen was working full-time as a waitress at Coleman's Cafe in Trenton, Tennessee, and she also rented a room above it. So she was living in that cafe as well.
So before you go any further, I want to make a point here. Anybody that's within our listener audience or comes across this video that's from the area, I want to encourage you, especially if you were ever involved with somebody who was connected to these events back in the early 50s, please leave a comment. There's going to be things in here that we don't know simply because we weren't around, and neither of our parents were around either. But like my grandparents, uncles, aunts, stuff like that on my family were definitely there. So if you see this, please don't hesitate to straighten us out or add to anything that we present here. We know based on our research and who's helped us along the way, what this story consists of. And again, if you have anything to add to it, don't hesitate to add it to it. And Trenton was a different place back then.
Oh, yeah.
The bypass was not part of Trenton back then, and everything kind of happened around Court Square and just off Court Square.
That's right.
And so it's a very different place than even our age group would even expect.
Heck, I think they even called it Main Street down in front of City Hall, and not City Hall, but the courthouse.
Yeah, which is college now.
Okay, yeah. So it was Main Street at that time, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, anybody in the audience that knows anything beyond what we present here or can straighten it out if it's not right, please don't hesitate to do so. It'll make for interesting reading, and we can come back and discuss it too. We're not just going to stop here if we have to. So anyway, we're setting the scene. Coleman's Cafe.
Right.
And, the main street of Trenton, Tennessee is what we understand to what is now the Steel Building.
Right.
Is where Coleman's Cafe was. And across the street where Last Drop coffee shop is now, in that area was the theater.
Right.
Okay, so just setting the scene for everybody. This is kind of right in front of the southern face of the courthouse now today. And again, the public defender's office is in the Steel Building now.
Right.
And Last Drop Cafe.
Kathleen is living above that in an apartment. I believe it was just rooms then, for maybe people that would rent those rooms out, and they would use a community restroom.
Kind of like a boarding house
right.
almost, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the staircase that would go down into the kitchen area of this cafe. So Kathleen was living there, and she was dating several different men at this time, like I said, with some authority and some pull in that town or surrounding towns. So she was dating the deputy over at Union City, and she was dating a constable, I believe, from Dyer County. And she also, while she was working at Coleman's Cafe, she met veteran and local businessman Robert Hayes Phelan. So Robert Hayes Phelan, everybody called him Red around town because he had this red hair. He was 30 years old. He was married with 2 young sons, and he was part owners of the McCaleb and Phelan Motor Company. His wife had just been elected worthy matron for the Eastern Star, and he was elected worthy patron for the Eastern Star. He was very well respected in Trenton, and in 1948, he actually ran for sheriff against Doc Garrison, only losing by a few hundred votes. He planned on running again that January of 1952. Red and Kathleen were often seen flirting inside Coleman's Cafe together, and it's believed that there were times when Red would take Kathleen to Milan to her ex-husband's to see Johnny. And I think she felt safe with him. I think he made her feel pretty safe, and she did. So on January 17th of 1952, Kathleen worked her normal shift at Coleman's Cafe, and I believe Red came in sometime that day, and Kathleen and he made plans to have some late night.
Just to get back together
Right.
later that night.
Later that night.
Sure, sure.
So she works her normal shift, and then she walks, about 8 p.m., she walks across the street to the movie theater. And she watches a movie, and about 10:30, she walks back to her apartment at Coleman's Cafe. And she goes upstairs and probably cleans up a little bit and gets ready, and then she goes to the window and sneaks out to the fire escape and goes down and meets Red Phelan, who is sitting in his vehicle
Waiting on her.
waiting on
Yeah,
her,
to pick her up.
waiting to pick her up.
Yeah.
So first, they get in the vehicle and they drive out to this little roadhouse a little bit outside of Trenton. We don't know where that is either.
Right.
If anybody knows where that is, let us know. But they stop there for cigarettes, Coke, and a beer. And Red goes inside to get this, and Kathleen's sitting outside waiting, and another car pulls up with a man and a woman inside. And the car hop comes out to see what they need, and the man says, "Tell that red-headed son of a bitch to get out here." And the car hop didn't understand him. And he said, "Again, you tell that red-headed stud at the counter to come out here." And Kathleen looked at this car hop and said, "And please tell him to hurry." And she looked scared. So Red comes out of the roadhouse, and he and the man get into this altercation. And he jumps in his car, and he takes off towards Lover's Lane with Kathleen, with the man and the woman in their car trailing behind them.
Now, this was at 11 o'clock, 11:30
Right.
at night.
So it was 10:30 when she got out of the movies.
Yeah.
Went up, probably cleaned up a little bit, and then met him down in the parking lot probably about 10:30, 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
About 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And, so this would have been a little bit before midnight, 11, 10:30, 11, something like
So
that.
this roadhouse, I assume that it was probably some kind of store, bar, somewhere that people just hung out, because it was open clearly later at night.
Oh, yeah. I'm kind of wondering what this is. I'm thinking of like a place you bootlegging alcohol and all kind of stuff out of it, but I'm
See,
sure that's not what it is, but that's what's in my head. So if anybody knows what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
where this place was, it'd be great to find out, because that's
Yeah.
just interesting. So around 6 a.m. on January the 18th, this 16-year-old boy comes running into McCaleb and Phelan Motor Company, and he's shouting at Herbal Smith, who is the salesman that is opening up the Phelan company.
dealership.
The dealership, yeah.
Yeah.
So the two race out together, and they go towards Old Cades Road, Lover's Lane. And the boy, once they get closer, the boy yells, "There it is." It being a McCaleb and Phelan Dodge with its rear doors open. The boy pointed towards the weeds and says, "Right there." And this Herbal, his name's Herbal Smith says, which is different because I'm not used to those names, but
Right.
Herbal Smith says, "Good God, that's the boss." So he turns around to this kid and he says, "You got to stay here while I go get the sheriff." And this kid says, "Hell no, I'm not staying out here." Do you blame him though?
No.
Said nothing. So he says, "Hell no, I'm not doing that." And he said, "Let's go find a phone." So they get in the car and they go find the closest phone. And they call Doc Garrison, who at that time was about 11 miles away working an arson case in Humboldt, Tennessee. So it was around 10:30 a.m. before Doc Garrison arrived at Lover's Lane. And by the time he got out there, there was nearly 200 sleuths out there already going through everything.
So people just started showing up.
How quickly did that happen? I mean, this Herbal Smith or whatever must have a big ass mouth, because by the time that Doc Garrison and Deputy Reese got to the scene, it was covered in people.
Yeah. And it was just a few hours.
Contaminated the crime
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah.
I mean, bad.
Yeah.
Red was dressed in a khaki shirt and pants and a brown cloth jacket, and Kathleen was dressed in a long sleeve brown blouse with a long brown skirt and she had a pink and white checkered scarf tied around her hair. So one of these people in the crowd tells the sheriff, "Oh my God, that's Kathleen Wilson McCage. That's Kathleen McCage, the girl that works up at
Coleman's Cafe.
Coleman's Cafe.
Yeah.
She's the waitress up there." So there's Red Phelan, who is a highly respected man that's married in this town and run for sheriff even before, and his mistress. And so this is Trenton. And there was already 200 people out there looking at their bodies. Can you imagine? There was not even social media then. This is what blows my mind. How the hell did it get around that quick?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a few hours from the time they were found to the time the sheriff showed up.
Yeah, but 200 people.
Well, I mean, you got to think the salesman probably went back to the dealership and told everybody there, and they all got on the phone, and that's just, yeah. And it's a small community. It's not going to take long to tell everybody, even back then.
So the rumors and the gossip was going crazy, and all these people had ruined the crime scene, and all the prints and the tire tracks, all of it had been just run all over. They put the sheriff at the mercy of them. I mean, like, what the heck? How did y'all find this? I mean, that was pretty much all they had then.
Yep.
So there was blood in the back seat of the car. And these are things that he saw, that Doc Garrison saw when he looked at it himself without having to ask anybody. So this was pretty apparent. So there was blood in the back seat. The dome light was broke in the back seat. And there was blood in the floorboard. And on the left side of the vehicle, the grass was pressed down. But the bodies were both on the right side of the vehicle. So a bystander yells, I found her panties, talking about Kathleen's pink undergarment that he found under a bridge about 10 yards away from the bodies. So Doc took that, and that was her, those were hers. So Doc Garrison knew Red's family, but he did not know Kathleen's family at all. And he immediately said, "Get John McCage here now, up to the station."
Which would have been her ex-husband.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they bring him in. The autopsies were done by two doctors that we remember, I believe, James Hall and Dr. Edward Barker.
Of course. I mean, Dr. Barker was my doctor from birth.
Right. So.
And Dr. Hall, I mean, staples of the community.
Right. So they did the autopsies, and they both were shot 2 times. And with a .22 caliber pistol, and they were both killed around midnight. So they weren't out there long.
Yeah. As determined by Dr. Hall and Dr. Barker.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. So Kathleen had been shot in the back, and one of the bullets had traveled up to her shoulder, and the other bullet that was shot through her back exited through her nose.
Oh, Lord.
Right. And Red had been shot once in the back and once behind the ear. Both of them had been shot at close range. So they weren't running, they were shot at close range.
And Doc Garrison had determined, along with the doctors, that it was a .22 caliber pistol that was used.
Right.
Now, a strange connection here. The next case, which would have been, again, 2 years later in 1954, a .22 rifle.
Right. Right.
Same caliber.
Right. What's the sound that goes off with those?
It's a very high-powered crack.
Yeah.
And it has a long echo associated with it.
Okay.
Now, like I said, .22s are not messy rounds, but they're very deadly. They go in and bounce around and do a lot of damage. And it's rare that there's an exit wound associated with them always, but in this case, close range,
Right.
it's going to happen.
So Doc Garrison now is trying to reconstruct the crime scene because, it's been screwed off pretty much. So he kind of put together that the two were in the back seat, and the killer came up, opened the back door, and shot first Red in the back. It didn't kill him, and he tried to get out the other door of the back
Gotcha.
seat. And Kathleen was trying to scramble out as well, and she was shot too. So while she was trying to get out, she was shot through the back, and then again, that exited through her nose. But they were both pulled to the right side of the vehicle to the road, up to the road. So that was something that he had to reconstruct himself pretty much, but it was pretty apparent. The closest house to this crime scene was about a mile down the road, and it was owned by a woman named Mrs. Vernon Turner. And Mrs. Vernon Turner told Doc Garrison that around 1:30 a.m. she heard a horn honking in her driveway. So she gets up and looks out the window and sees a car with 3 or 4 people in it. And the driver gets out and exits and goes to the other side of the vehicle, and then they back out of the driveway. The next morning, around 10 a.m., she's out washing clothes, and she sees a car pull up in the front. So she's going through the back door to let them in, and she sees a man coming up and putting something under her door, and then by the time she gets there, he's pulling out of the driveway. So she finds a note that tells her she needs to be quiet. She doesn't need to say anything about this. She knows too much. So, I mean, that's kind of
Eerie.
juicy. I mean, that doesn't happen much anymore.
No.
John McCage is taken into custody, and his alibi is that he was at home in bed. His mother confirmed that, who lived with them, and his wife, and his son. So his 5-year-old son and Kathleen's 5-year-old son said, my daddy's been home in bed.
Yeah.
Which is weird, but that's how it went.
Yep.
So the Phelans were also briefly questioned, and their alibis were confirmed and stories were checked out. Mr. and Mrs. Max Solomon, who owned Coleman's Cafe, said that they thought Kathleen was supposed to go see Johnny that night, her little boy, but and they didn't know that she had plans with Red Phelan. They also did claim that Red and Kathleen were flirtatious with one another, and they knew one another. So it was pretty apparent that she wasn't going to see Johnny that night. They didn't leave until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So that was pretty apparent. Also, Red had been attending a moose meeting that night, and he didn't get out of that meeting until around 10:30 either. And when he got out of the meeting, he went to Phelan and got a car. So he went up there to the Phelan Motor Company, and he got a car. I don't know if he was trying to get something, a secret car to take Kathleen out to Lover's Lane. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he did get a vehicle from up there. So Katie Johnson told Doc Garrison that, and she was Kathleen's very best friend that worked up at Bluebird Cafe. She was a waitress there, and she said Kathleen had all kinds of boyfriends. Which I feel like she kind of threw her under the bus.
Well, she's dead. It don't matter.
Right, everywhere from Trenton to Central to Dyersburg to Jackson.
Yeah.
So
And Union City.
Right, and Union City. Oh, she didn't have that. These were just some extra ones that Katie. Thanks, Katie. So, yeah, so that's Katie.
Katie didn't care.
Katie wasn't.
Katie might have been a little jealous too.
Katie was a little bit pissed. So Garrison traced down these men that Katie told her about, which was good because he was able to clear all their alibis, and they were all cleared, and that was some other people behind them. R.O. Pybus presented this. We talked about him last week, the coroner.
Right.
He presented this to a secret grand jury on January the 19th, and they all confirmed and ruled this a murder by people or persons unknown. So that was obvious. That same day, Miss Vernon Turner, she got another note. And this one said that if you don't want to, you better be quiet or you're going to end up like Red Phelan and that girl.
Yeah.
So, I mean, which to me, we'll talk about it, but it seems suspicious to me that was said. So that was said, and Miss Vernon took that to the police. Also, Another little weird thing that happened, there was a journalist from the Memphis Appeal, and he came down to work this case. He'd left his wife and his kid, just abandoned them to come work this. And he goes and says that he got him a letter too from somebody telling him to stay away from it. Don't report on this.
So did we know where he lived in Trenton? Did we know where that happened?
I think he was originally from Rhode Island, which is weird as shit because he was down here working at a factory and trying to cover this case. I don't know where he lived, but he was a journalist, and he thought this case was going to break it wide open. Well, he ended up becoming a suspect and taken into custody and given a lie detector test, and he was cleared. Last name was King, but anyway, he was cleared, and he ended up going back to his wife and getting his shit together. I hope so.
Well, apparently that's how it happened, but
Right.
either way, he had this note appear.
Yeah, he had this note appear, and I think it told him to not report on this, but he did that himself, and he admitted that when he was taking his lie detector test, so he could get closer to the case. He thought this was going to be his meal ticket out of that factory, and he would.
He was going to be a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
But they got him in custody for abandoning his child and wife. So that's how they got him in custody, and then it just broke open after that. Like, you could be the one that did this. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
it was pointy. Hell, Doc Garrison got blamed for it because they said, he was running. Yeah, you just wanted to wipe out your opponent, which, I mean, okay, I don't even think that he really addressed it. But they also, there was rumors going around about a Dyer County constable that had a date with Kathleen the next week, that he did it, and that he committed suicide. I mean, it just went crazy.
But he didn't, and he had to come prove that he didn't.
And he had to make a statement. He said, I have to make a public statement
Right.
because, I mean, everybody's going to think I'm dead. And
Right.
I poisoned myself. I shot myself. I mean,
Yeah.
this never happened.
Right.
So, I mean, everybody was trying to insert themselves somehow into this case, except for, I'm sure, Doc Garrison and the constable and
And R.O. Pybus.
they didn't really want to be inserted like they
No.
were. But
No.
so TBI. So we talked a little bit about them last week in the 1954 Lovers Lane case, but this TBI was how they were involved is 7 months earlier they had just formed. Okay, so they were brand new, and there was only two men. These were badasses. I mean, these two men were really good at what they did, and they solved 5 cases in those 7 months. Their names were Robert Etzel and Roger Kennan. So they came to Doc Garrison after they found out about this case, and they asked if they could help, and he immediately said no. Now, I imagine that was a pride thing, because really then there was not any investigators in Trenton. I mean, there was nothing, or Gibson County. So, I mean,
other than the sheriff's department, no.
But within a short period of time, I mean, like within a couple weeks, Doc Garrison gives them the lowdown of what went down out there. These two agents from TBI, and they pick up the case. So TBI does 5 lie detector tests on 5 different people, and each one of those people passed.
Yeah.
And this case just went freezing cold.
Yeah. And was it the same 2 agents that came along 2 years later?
Yes, but this case went cold. But like I said last week, I'm telling you, every January 17th at midnight, you can hear them shots out there. And some people say that you can see Kathleen and Red out there looking for her panties.
Looking for them panties?
Looking for them damn panties.
Oh, Lord. So somebody needs to take some panties and put out there and stop all that.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it involves the Phelan family.
Yeah.
And I don't know the only Phelans that I knew were Robert Sidney,
Right.
Sid, Paul, Dustin.
Yeah.
And I knew Robert Sidney's wife. And it seems like that's kind of the time era that we're talking about was when Robert Sidney and Miss Gale were the same age.
Yeah.
You know, in their 30s, young kids.
And I'm confused because we don't know how, if we know that Robert Sidney and Robert Hayes were
Related.
related, but we don't know how.
Right.
So that's confusing. Yeah.
Right. And then the McCaleb family, of course, we know who all those were. And of course, Bubby Jones, Howard's dad, and God rest his soul, Caleb's grandfather.
That's right.
He was married to a McCaleb, and man, it's amazing. The reason I bring this up is it's amazing. Like that's all the people my grandparents hung out with.
Right.
You know, or
So-
my uncles and aunts, and it's
it's a shame that we
weird.
didn't hear this story. You know, it blows my mind that
Yeah.
my parents are right there.
Yep.
And I've never heard this story with such a prominent family.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know the Phelans. I think most everybody from there does.
Yeah.
And I never knew about this.
Right.
So it's very interesting, and it's a good story for this time of year. It really is. I think these two, I think Red and Kathleen, are pretty much the mascots for this area for murders. You know, what I
Murder
mean?
and unsolved murder. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is such a beautifully romantic tragedy that it's almost you almost want to sing it. You know,
But for it to happen twice.
right?
And
But-
we don't know. I mean, we know how the grand jury left the 54 case,
Right.
but we don't know that there wasn't more to that either.
Right, we don't
So-
know.
so-
I mean, there's speculation, and that's the part that I love about this because it does keep that area is like a portal to something really really weird, and it's Halloween almost, so it's exciting to talk about this and to know that, you know, more than likely, I'm right when I say that Kathleen and Red are out there searching for those panties.
Panties. Wow. Well, so that's the juice of Lover's Lane.
That's the juice.
Yeah. And Trenton.
Trenton.
See,
Trenton.
again, this goes back to before there was a bypass and before Trenton was anything like any of us know it today.
And let me tell you, here's what I think. I'm going to tell you what I think, and which ain't worth shit because I'm not an investigator and I don't have, but that man and that woman, who was that? Why weren't they questioned? And who do I think it was? I think it was John McCage, and I think it was his wife, and I think his mom stayed home and kept Johnny that night, and there you go. That's my thoughts on it.
Well, and we have it where people say that Mr. Cooney, Robert Sidney's dad, could have been responsible for it.
I've heard that.
You know?
But they also said Doc Garrison did it, and they also said, you know, is this business related? Was this business related? Because it seems awfully harsh and very personal. You know, it almost seems like Kathleen's husband, even though he got Johnny and he got another wife, he was going to make sure that she never got in the position of power enough to where she could take him back.
Take that kid back, right?
Right. And when she was around Red Phelan, that was definitely some intimidation for him. He had to feel a little bit because he had some pull.
So you know what? It just reminded me. One of my great aunts worked for the Department of the Army at the Arsenal at this time, and see, my grandmother worked at the Arsenal at some point. I don't think it was this time. I think it was later on, maybe in the '60s. But it would have had to been because, yeah. But anyway, my great aunt, Martha Holmes, we called her Sis, who was also the organist for the Presbyterian Church in Trenton. She worked at the Arsenal in personnel for the Army, Department of the Army. So she probably knew this guy.
Right.
She probably knew her ex-husband.
Right. And that's, you know, I wonder and I'm not saying he did it. I'm not saying he did it.
Right.
But to me, to be 3 months divorced, to have enough power to say, well, she accused me of treating her inhumanely and cruel, but I got the kid.
But he was 3 months divorced and already remarried.
Right. And I got the kid.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was times. I don't know if it was the fact that she did not have a vehicle. She did not have a place to live. If it was his place of he was older than her. He was almost 10 years older than her. So he was 33 years old. Kathleen would have had that baby when she was still a teenager. And to her, he treated her like shit.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. And I think when she got out of that and she got to Max and to Mr. and Mrs. Max Solomon's cafe, and she felt safe there. And she felt protected by these men, whether it be from Union City, the deputy, whether it be the constable from
Dyer
Dyer County, or whether it be Red Phelan, who was running for sheriff, who was, successful. They did find that they were robbed. They were robbed. They had all their jewelry on them, but Red's wallet was taken and had $30 in it. I don't know how they knew that. And her purse Kathleen's purse was taken. So those two things were taken, but they could have been taken by some people that
The
got
3 or
out
4 hours with the 200
Right.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, that's another thing.
Yeah, that scene completely changed from the time it was discovered to the time the sheriff arrived.
But I'm thinking like Doc Garrison was thinking, bring me John McCage. And they kept him in custody from the 19th of January or the 18th until the 29th of January. So he was in there.
Yeah, a week and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strange. And that was it. That was it. After everybody was corroborated and lie detector tests were run, they just said, okay.
Because they couldn't get fingerprints. Doc Garrison didn't get any pictures of the crime scene.
Yep.
No pictures of the bodies, which is weird. I mean, nothing. Said he had some track, castings, but what good does that do if if they've been run over by 15 different, vehicles or 100 different vehicles? I mean, there's 200 people out there.
Yeah.
And this is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So he was at the mercy of these people that got out there first. And my thoughts are the note, not the fake one that this journalist wrote, but the note that was written to Miss Vernon Turner that said, kind of made himself personal to Red Phelan, but not to Kathleen. And that's depersonalizing. You know what I mean? That's detaching from that woman, which is something that people that are guilty often do. They no longer call, them by their name. It's that girl or that woman or that man, whoever they, they
Just
take out
refer to them in pronouns.
right. They take out all the value of them as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think she 3 months before, when she was divorcing him, she was already telling what was going to happen in her murder.
And know about the disposition of them, like where Red was buried and where she was buried?
No, I don't know. I do not know. I mean, I'm sure it's out there, but I do not know. I have to look and see if I could find that. But yeah, there's a lot to this case, and you can look at it in so many different ways. People could say maybe his wife had something done, but as character goes, and past behaviors, that did not reflect on to be her or his parents or his family. I don't know the business part of it. I don't think that there was anything that was ever tied business-wise. I have heard that there was some gambling involved. That was one of the rumors too. But to me, this seems very personal, and this seems, very, very personal. That enough that you had to know they were there that night. And the only people that knew who they were there that night was a man and a woman that followed them there. That's scary. So, unless it was a random serial killer, which
Yeah, but Miss Turner even said that there was more than two people in that car that was in her
Yes.
driveway.
Yeah. And if it was just a random serial killer, he's not going to stop at Miss Vernon's house.
No, no,
He's not going to stop over at Miss Vernon Turner's house and say, you better leave this alone.
right,
And I don't, and pull up in her driveway and change drivers. And
right.
it's just it's very odd. And I guess then they didn't do, the autopsy, I guess, would have reported whether or not she had been sexually assaulted, but I don't think she was. That also points a lot to her ex-husband. It's not, that's the ultimate power, is taking her life. He's already taken everything else. He took away her freedom of feeling like a human being when they were married, and he took away her son.
How do we know that she didn't, go over there and have Red take her over there? Because the Solomons had told that she had gotten rides to see
Right.
her son from various people.
Yeah, she didn't have a car, so she
But
would.
how do we know she didn't go over there and threaten her ex-husband and his new wife? And
Absolutely.
I know the upcoming sheriff, or I'm doing this, and I know this one.
It
And
could have been that way, and it
oh gosh, it
absolutely,
could go anyway.
I could see her. I could even see that happening a little bit.
Yeah.
Her saying, you have him now, but
I'm gonna get it.
right.
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna get
get
him back, and that was it. That was the ultimate, right there. But for that little boy to say, my daddy was in bed. Well, you were in the bed too, so you really don't know unless your grandmother told you to say that,
back. Or his dad.
or your stepmother.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think she was awfully jealous of Kathleen.
So she was ugly.
Probably.
Okay.
I don't know that. But that could have been a possibility. She could have been extremely jealous of Kathleen.
Yeah.
And wanted to have that power like John had. So those are just some thoughts on me, on what I believe.
No, again, growing up there, I never had heard about this, and growing up with the family that I grew up with,
Yeah.
never heard about it.
No.
Now I have some speculation about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but my great great uncle, formerly known as George Holmes,
George.
Snooks Holmes. So he was an attorney at this time, and was really close to the Phelan family.
Right.
And in about 1994 or 5, their house was struck by lightning and caught fire. And so we all
Is this the funeral home?
no, this was after the funeral home was sold to the Sheltons, and remember, this is 94, 95.
Yeah. Okay.
And but yeah, it was Holmes Funeral Home before, and that was owned by their parents. But anyway, Snooks was an attorney in town, and during the time of this case, but in 1994, 95, whenever that happened, he was retired from the bench. He was the chancellor in Gibson County, and so lightning had struck their house, and we went flying down there to rescue them or whatever we could do. And in a weird kind of way, this case made me remember this. But my stepdad at the time, Paul, was with us, and Snooks comes to the door or out into the driveway or into the street. Because, I mean, if you can imagine, this was right across from where you grew up on High Street. All of I'm surprised you don't remember this. All the fire department was out in front of this house.
Wait. Where was his house at?
It was the big white one next to Walter Bridges.
I remember.
All right, so it was burning.
Yes, I remember. I love that house.
And we were helping them get out of it. The fire department was there, and I mean, there's water and ash and smoke was everywhere, and we were helping them get out. And Snooks comes up to my stepdad at the time and says, I have this gun, and I need you to take this gun and forget that I gave it to you. I need you to keep possession of this gun and don't tell anybody. Don't, And it was a .22 pistol.
Oh, shit.
And so I mean, I could speculate
So
that
just
maybe that was the murder.
so yeah, it's just weird.
Yeah.
I heard the gunshots. I heard the ghost gunshots, whatever that is. But it is something. It's a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Sally knows,
Yeah.
and I know that she's out there looking at the panties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't
So,
do that to a girl. Don't take her panties when she's in a compromising position.
well, maybe
Hide
she
'em.
wasn't in a compromising position. Maybe she was dead when the panties got extracted.
Well,
But anyway, my point being is like you just never know like these stories and how connected you can be to them.
right, right.
You know, like with Sis working over at the Arsenal at this time, and
Yeah.
probably knowing
Oh, and
Kathleen's
I
ex-husband.
said people didn't talk back then. They didn't within each other, but they didn't pass these stories down, which is weird. I never heard the story. I wish that our grandparents would have told us some more damn stories.
Listen, we need to get on here sometime and tell the naked leapfrog story. We need to tell the swimming in the water tower story.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure every small town has some craziness in it, but this
Yeah.
is our version of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
That's crazy. All right. Well, again, this was the juice. This was actually part two of Lover's Lane, but it was the first event that kicked things off in 1952.
Was.
And we saw the second case last week. Go back and check out Lover's Lane Part 1, and you'll see the 1954 case that came from Lover's Lane. So with that, if there's nothing else to add,
There's nothing else to add.
right on. Well, thank you very much, and what a great work.
Thank you, Denise, again. Thank you, Denise, again. I want to
Yeah,
add that.
to everybody that's kicked in comments and stuff since Taryn started working on this case, thank you all.
Yes.
And please come back to this podcast and
Yes.
say so. Share it and subscribe to it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to stuff that we put up, because that's how we keep going. And drop your comments.
That's right.
All right.
See y'all next week.
Take care.